Hello everybody, and welcome to the latest Service Department News webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about geopolitical shifts and the future of business travel and extended stay. And it's safe to say there is a lot to get our teeth into on this discussion, which is sponsored by the Residents and Muse. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media. We are the publisher of Service Department News and 3 other sector-leading B2B titles for the real estate and hospitality industries. Now, today's webinar has 2 sponsors, and the first of which is the Residents, and we are going to see a short video to find out more about them. If you'd like to find out more about the Residents, you can look at the links in the chat and get in touch with them and find out more, and also get in touch with Steve from the Residents, who's also one of our panelists today by happy coincidence. Our second sponsor today is Muse, a well-known provider of hospitality management software for the hospitality industry. And same applies. Contact links for those guys are in the chat, so do get in touch to find out more. So today's webinar is going to last an hour. We're going to have around 45 minutes of panel discussion, and then we'd like to make it as interactive as we can. So we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So you can submit your questions using either the chat or the Q&A functions in Zoom. We'll either answer them there and then if they're on the topic we're discussing, or we'll save some time at the end. And finally, a recording will be sent to everyone who's registered for the webinar via email. Now then, let's have a look at some context. So all the screen grabs you're going to see on the next 2 slides are recent news stories from our websites and from other sources. So we'll start with the kind of industry specific ones, and there's some encouraging stuff here. So top left, you can see a shift in travel behavior among German businesses. They're traveling less, but they're spending more on their travel. Millennials and Gen Z want to travel more for business. GBTA reporting that European business travel spend was up 10% in 2024. A Silver Door report showing that corporate demand is increasing across the APAC region. And Flight Centre reporting strong international corporate travel outbound from the US. So some encouraging stuff there. However, this is set against fairly unpredictable background, and there's a lot of kind of big picture stuff which is affecting this. Before we started the session, I kind of apologized to Cara because this looks a bit like we're picking on the US a bit, but it's just that a lot of the recent stuff that's happened is due to policies coming from the US, including the top right one there, which is actually from today. So the US government has announced it's putting across a blanket ban really on citizens of 12 countries from entering the country. Some of the recent US policies are also causing economic uncertainty, which affects business travel. And we've all heard stories about kind of delays at borders, hassle at airports, this kind of thing, all the things which make the ideal frictionless business travel harder to achieve. There are links to some of those stories in the chat there if you'd like to catch up on them and get the full picture there. So let's meet our panelists. We've got a great bunch with us today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves as we see them on from left to right. Firstly, we've got Steve Lowy, who I think I'm now going to start calling David Fairclough after the super sub from his beloved Liverpool. He stepped in at fairly short notice to do this. So thank you, Steve. Would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure, minus the ginger hair. Very
Yeah.
niche football joke, so apologies. Yes, a bit lastminute.com, but my name is Steve Lowy. I'm CEO and founder of the Residents Apartments. We operate in 6 locations in London, and around 95 apartments. We also have a student brand called AES. So obviously a lot of the political stuff, we deal actually mainly with American universities, American students in London, and look after around 5,500 students a year. And we're launching a apart hotel brand in London in January called Geopolitical.
Thank you, Steve. And next we have Joe. Welcome to you, Joe.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Really pleased to be part of this esteemed panel. So my name is Joe Stather. I'm the UK Managing Director for Horwath HTL, which is a service line of Crow UK, which is probably best known as a large accounting firm, but we are a team of consultants focused on the hospitality, tourism and leisure space. Fair to say that predominantly we focus on hotels and hospitality and other forms of accommodation. And in terms of what we offer, it's very much across strategic planning, development advisory, asset management and due diligence around transactions.
Thank you, Joe. And finally, Cara, welcome to you.
Thanks, George. Great to be here. I'm Cara Lingle. I'm the Global VP of Supply Chain and Director of Sales for the US and with Synergy Global Housing. So we are a hybrid, a operator and aggregator of flexible accommodations, tech-enabled. We have a variety of markets, even though we're headquartered globally in Texas, in Houston. We operate in multiple markets across the US and in the UK and Dublin, and have teams regionally placed throughout the globe to support all of our clients.
Great stuff. Thank you, Cara. If you look in the chat, you'll be able to see the LinkedIn profiles for all our speakers. So if you'd like to carry on the conversation with them after the session, then please do make contact. On the subject of which, there's going to be quite a lot of information pasted in the chat, so we'll leave the session open for a couple of minutes when we get to 3 o'clock, so you can cut and paste or take some notes from that if you need to. Right, let's kick off. We will look to the future shortly, but first, let's try and get a picture of how we are currently. Cara, I'd like to start with you and ask you, to what extent are the current global conflicts and political uncertainty influencing corporate decisions on where to send business travelers and how long they stay? Can you share some recent specific examples of what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So, I think it's fair to say that there's been this looming and waiting of, what's going to happen next for at least so far this year, right? January onward with the new administration in the US especially. I think globally, business travel on the whole is just being more scrutinized. We're seeing trips extended because reasoning for trips is being combined, and people are certainly becoming more cost conscious across the business travel sector. From a visa and immigration perspective, the processing times are being extended and even delayed oftentimes because of the looming decisions. We had one last night this morning, but obviously that's been up in the air for quite some time, and finally the shoe is dropped, right? The work authorization status of certain employees and where they are in the world, in the corporations that they're supporting, in the roles that they're supporting, continues to put a strain on corporations and creates risk for those organizations if they're not prepared and they don't have processes and due diligence in place to manage everything that's been changing and evolving over the course of the year. The corporates that we're working with specifically have instituted things like travel advisories across the business, making sure that they have policies and guidelines that are clearly written, and taking extra steps to educate travelers, those within the corporation that actually, get into the air and get into accommodations. Things like town halls, I think, are even becoming more and more common from what we understand from our corporate buyers. And, you know, it goes without saying, but now more than ever, traveler tracking is of the utmost importance, and it's super critical. Some recent examples, probably not as much talked about in some of the things that you already shared, George, but, you know, there was a recent conflict between India and Pakistan, and despite the ceasefire there is certain unrest, especially in the northern area of India at this point. And so business travel is being diverted, for example, to southern areas within that country, just to, you know, kind of de-risk employees in certain areas. And cross-border travel, and you know, while it's still ongoing, it will continue to ongo. I think that it's fair to say that making sure people are prepared, that they're aware of every circumstance for every country that they enter and every border that they cross, and that they have proper documentation. Those are really the things that are at the front of mind for the traveler and the corporation, as well as us as operators, to support them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the slides that we showed on the first of those two context slides demonstrated that the appetite for business travel is as strong as ever. It's, you know, it's rebounded really well post-pandemic. People want to travel. Is that the sense that you get, that people are committed to traveling for business, and despite the obstacles being put in their way, they're going to try and find a way to do it?
Oh yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think the other thing is, with the continuation of remote and hybrid work, and as that continues to be more of the norm in corporate America, there's more reason for people to travel, right? To get that face time and to be collaborative and to work in teams. And so there's definitely a desire, whether it's for growth within the organization or to blend travel with leisure. We're still seeing some of the leisure reemerge in the last few years as well. So there's a lot of desire. I think the change is where is it going versus more traditional.
Yeah, thanks, Cara. Steve,
Yeah.
your portfolio is in London, but are you seeing your overseas business travelers changing their habits because of what's going on in various parts of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back 3 years, 2022 is the heady days for the service departments in London anyway. I think, you know, there wasn't enough stock. The demand was huge. Rates were high. Pound was weak. You know, all the stars aligned post-COVID. I think probably since early 2023, when the writers' strike kicked in the States, and then similar time you had the tech industry sort of making a lot of job cuts, you know, that meant there was less people moving. At the same time, there's a lot of people who've come into London as operators, and therefore, you know, basic economics, increased supply, lower demand, price comes down. And so that has coincided with uncertainty within international businesses, who therefore have a lower budget, and they're able to get really good quality apartments at a lower price. So where I guess 2022 and even 2019 into early 2020 was pretty predictable, and even people like Synergy and other bigger on the agency side could tell you way in advance, like, oh, there'll be 1,000 moves this year or 500 moves this year. Now it's a lot more, well, it could be between 50 and 500, or tell me if I'm wrong, Cara, because I probably am, or between 100 and 1,000, rather than it's definitely 500. And that is because of what's happening around the world. You know, I remember in 2022, you had a lot of issues with people arriving late because they didn't get their visas on time. That was blamed on COVID. Now, they may not be getting visas because they may not get the visa, you know, not because of any delays. And so I think what there's meant is that if you, and hopefully we have done, when you sign up a lease on a building, you build in the bumps and you build in the softer rate and you build in maybe a higher occupancy but a lower rate, and people are staying longer but at a lower rate, then you're fine. But obviously if your models were based on 2022, then that was difficult. What we have seen speaking to people is that certain pockets of the world have had huge demand still. Singapore, I believe, still really hot market, and other places. So I think the world has got a lot smaller. And I know that's a bit of a cheesy statement, but it has. And I think people want to do business with people and countries that are welcoming them in. The UK has had an identity crisis since Brexit. I think it is softening. I think the EU-UK trade deal will help, and maybe there'll be tweaks in the encouragement for certain types of companies to come to the UK and set up business over the next 5 to 10 years, particularly around life sciences in London, which will give a spark in terms of demand. But yeah, it's amazingly uncertain. Interestingly, I deal a lot with the US, and I've been fortunate and sometimes unfortunate to travel across 33 states. It's even in American cohorts, each state's slightly different in terms of what's going on and how it's going. But from a country perspective, this ban on international students, which was last week, combined with uncertainty over J1 and F1 visas, which are related to internships, has certainly caused a shift in terms of, we're potentially talking to people about shifting programs here as opposed to doing them in the States, because you don't want to plan 100 people moving somewhere and then at the last minute find out they can't get in. And that it's annoying for everyone. Most importantly, the end user, the person who's going to move. So yeah, hopefully it wasn't too waffly, but there's no straight answer to it, unfortunately. And it's changing definitely daily and sometimes hourly in terms of what is happening. Not just the US, but like the India-Pakistan thing. It's 100-year-old tension that suddenly blew up literally. And then, crikey, people can't move, people can't go abroad, people don't want to go to certain areas, and that you can't predict as a business, and that's quite tough.
Yeah. Joe, Steve's alluded a couple of times there to the unpredictability of the market at the moment, particularly in terms of forecasting demand, forecasting revenue. From an advisory side, when you're looking at properties that have a significant proportion of their business coming from business travel, how does that work? What advice can you give people in that situation when what was looked at as a kind of a safe, steady, dependable revenue stream is now probably more unpredictable than leisure demand?
Absolutely. It's funny how things shift, isn't it? I mean, first of all, I think some of the insights shared by Cara and Steve, they're fascinating, first of all. And secondly, I would absolutely agree with, I think, a lot of this friction that we're seeing right now. I think there most definitely is an appetite for people to travel for business, but boy, is it getting harder in some circumstances. I think when you're advising around the kind of business travel dynamics, you've really got to get into the detail and look at it on an asset by asset level, right? Because different assets appeal to ultimately demand not just from business in general, but different business sectors, and some of the things that we're seeing across the world right now in terms of tariffs and what have you, they're not impacting all business sectors equally. So I think you really need to pay close attention to which of the sectors and which of the organizations that you're looking to capture demand from, and how are some of these things going on in the world going to impact them? Because inevitably, when there are big changes in policy, you get winners and you get losers, and you kind of need to make sure that you're ultimately on the right side of that. And I think, this comes down ultimately to, again, the fundamentals of having good diversity of demand and being able to, I think, kind of pivot into certain directions when you see changes, and having that fleet of foot, somewhat entrepreneurial approach, even if you're a very large operator, to be able to adapt to the market conditions as they change. I know that's very, very hard at the moment because things are changing so quickly. But I think, for the businesses that continue to perform well, it will be those that can adapt very quickly to things that are changing in the market and try and preempt some of these challenges coming down the track.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Cara, is all this uncertainty having an effect on corporate travel budgets? Are businesses cutting back? We've established that the appetite for travel is there, but are are companies being more cautious in the amount of money that they allocate for travel?
I mean, I think price is always king in terms of where the corporate buyer prioritizes, where they go, who they do business with, right? I mean, we've seen that as a historical trend forever, but I do think that probably just, there's just a number of things that in addition to that they also have to take into consideration nowadays, in addition to cost. And let's be honest, as an organization, even Synergy on the whole, it's not cheap to keep your employees safe. It's not cheap to invest in technology that allows for support of traveler tracking. It's not cheap to have, staffing to support, employees when they're, boots on the ground in any number of countries, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So I think, yeah, there's cost containment for sure, but I think it's tied to the fact that as we grow, just as a global economy, there's more and more demands for us to invest in things to safeguard our organizations, to safeguard our operations, and to safeguard our guests and our clients. And, costs go up because of those things. And there's always an attempt to try to contain cost as a result of all that growth.
Yeah. And Steve, how about your corporate clients? Are they sharpening their pencils? Have you seen budgets coming down?
Yes, yeah, I think I said it before. I don't know if it's they know they can get a better deal in London now than before, or they have sharpened their pencils. I don't know quite what it is. Sometimes we're getting some really good punchy rates that we used to get, and some don't. And I think we've found probably where the normal is in London in terms of general demand, availability. But I think you still have yields of peak periods of requirements. Obviously there was a big move from Hong Kong at one point with families. So 3 beds are really popular. In the summers, you have a lot of intern groups from a lot of the big firms. They want normally studios or 1 beds. So I think it's important to have a diverse stock and diverse locations. I also think within London, and I guess it's the same in New York and other big cities where there's big firms, different parts of London have different boosts at different parts of the year because of different companies requiring people within 30-minute walk of the offices. So yeah, our rate is definitely lower. It's the balance between occupancy and rate, your RevPAR in hotels. So yeah, I think it's you got to be on your toes, you got to pivot, you've got to be nimble, you've got to work closely with your agency partners and your direct business, and you've got to be flexible. And I think that's good business. I think everyone had a good run for a while, and I think now it's about being dynamic and doing the best that you can in the environment you're in, and having strategies that really work and make sense for your particular business. You're not going to be the same as everyone else. Every business is slightly different.
Yeah. Cara, I think I might have cut you off in your last answer there. Apologies if I did. It may have been the signal dropping out, but did you want to add anything to that topic?
Well, I was just going to add, kind of to piggyback on what Steve said. I think the other thing that we're seeing more of, and I think this has been a long time coming, quite honestly, but is the blend of buyer profiles across the sector, right? Where you've got travel buyers, you've got mobility buyers, you've got internship programs, and people are getting smart, right? They're leveraging that buying power to buy down costs. And so where that really works in the favor of the corporates is to align themselves with key partners and operators in key locations, and consolidate even across business lines within their own organizations. And I think we're going to see that trend continue, right? So
yeah, thanks, Cara. Synergy is in not a unique, but you're in a group of a select group of companies who are agents and operators. So you've got a great overall picture of the sector. But in terms of the supply chain, the actual accommodation providers, what are they doing to reassure their customers in terms of traveller safety, risk management, and this kind of stuff during these uncertain times. Can you give us some examples of best practice, perhaps, that's from providers in your supply chain?
Well, from a organization perspective, we have a really robust due diligence, right, that we require as a part of our provider network. So, you know, we look at things like financial stability. We look at things like, you know, adherence to minimum security and risk standardization, like GDPR and things like that. So there's a lot there that's already in place just in order to be a part of our, you know, provider network, if you will. But then in addition to that, I think, you know, having things like training for staffing and making sure that people understand with the, you know, risk in the climate that's going on globally right now, that they are educating their people both on property, but within the teams that do business with their corporate clients to share the feedback of what they're seeing, and being a strategic partner, like Steve said before. You know, whether you're working with an operator in a key market or you're working with somebody like Synergy who has global reach, I think we're all trying to kind of blend some of those best practices to make sure that nobody can stay ahead of the risk, right? Nobody can predict what's coming, but if we take everything that we've learned and apply that tactically to be better, I think just that at a minimum, in addition to the standardized vetting and de-risk that we do as a part of our due diligence, you know, we're all in a pretty good place.
Yeah, thanks, Cara. Steve, have you noticed any increase in the kind of the wish lists, if you like, that you have to provide to some of the distribution channels that you use? Do they scrutinize you a bit more before they send corporates to you these days?
It's most difficult when if Cara ever stays with us. We need champagne, robes. I mean, it's bubble bath. It's crazy. No, I think really we have a lot with the US universities that we have their risk managers come over and check everything and check our fire risk assessments. And I think gone are the days that companies can take for granted that the end operator, the end product, is actually safe and secure, and therefore there's a lot of checks throughout the process, ourselves with the agent, ourselves with our own insurance company. We have, for our 400 apartments, 3 full-time compliance people. They deal with health and safety, fire risk assessments, accreditation through ISAP, accreditation for other things. As you may or may not know, and it's probably the same around the world, fire regulations, because of Grenfell, have changed constantly. And so there's almost something new every year that you have to then work on. And so, yeah, I think that side is really important. I also think service levels. I think that's from inquiry to pricing to booking confirmation, then going on to the welcome. Things will always go wrong, as we all know from our own homes. So it's how quickly you can respond, how quickly you fix it, your communication with the agent and the guest. I also think, as it's a more competitive market, is holding your hands up when you have not met your expectations and dealing with it. And I think we really pride ourselves on our very close relationships with the agents we work with, for them to really know us and us to know them and know exactly what their requirements are. So there's no assumptions. It's very much a partnership, and if it doesn't continue as a partnership, the end user ends up not being that happy, and the agency potentially will lose that larger contract. So yeah, I think that's sort of where it is. I think as apartments or service apartments or homes have become more popular as corporate destinations for travelers, I think the whole industry has had to up their game. And I also think, because I think you had a session yesterday about these super luxury hotels building residencies at the very top end, that is, I wouldn't say we are, I think, we're at the 4-star level, but at the super luxury end, I think there's a lot of competition there. And therefore you really, really have to nail that service and delivery very consistently, particularly if someone's going to stay with you for 2 to 6 months at £700 a night. And therefore, I think there is more stringency there, and ultimately we all want happy customers and that's the reality. I think, as Cara was hinting, the cost of delivery of service now is a lot more expensive than it was pre-COVID. Minimum wage for us, minimum wage, national insurance, inflation on other electricity and gas and everything's just more expensive. And so cutting corners is not really an option, but it is more expensive to deliver. So your margins may be slightly lower, but the more consistent you are, the more happy the customers are, the more will return, and therefore it's just a better business model going forwards. But there is more demand, and that's student to corporate luxury travelers.
On that service issue, Steve, one of the attractions of the service department model, and the reason why investors and operators alike got involved, was you didn't need as many staff to service a building as you would have done with a traditional hotel. Are we at the stage now where the one-click journey, the frictionless travel is all well and good, but are we at the stage now where people actually want somebody on site as well? Do you provide any human interaction, or are they still happy to do everything via their phones?
No, I think we do. I mean, I think we always have done. I'm not that old, although I feel it. But I'm quite old-fashioned with hospitality. I think service apartments, you're welcoming people into a home. Yeah, they're living with you. They're not staying with you. It's a big difference. And I think our housekeepers, who we get a lot of compliments about, are more like if you have a cleaner at home, which I don't, but if you did, it's probably more like that person than a hotel housekeeper. And having run hotels, I know how it works, where you're in and out as quickly as possible. A 2 or 3 bedroom apartment could take a couple of hours to clean. It just needs to be clean, and so if it takes 2 hours, it takes 2 hours. And so I think people have always wanted this human interaction. I think fiddly things like, how does the dishwasher work, or washing machine work, or those sort of things, I think as best as you can deliver that information, as easy as that is, the check-in process, I think that's as frictionless as possible is good. But ultimately, if someone has a major issue, they want to speak to someone. It's human nature. Yeah, they want reassurance. We have 24-hour cover, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There is always someone at the end of the line. Can't find the front door. Where are you standing? You're at the wrong address. People want that. They don't want a chatbot at that point. Obviously, if you've given all the right information beforehand, you don't have that issue, but people don't read, people don't engage with emails. These things happen. But yeah, I think the human side is really important. And we've never, as much as we try to embed technology to streamline things, it's never instead of people. There will always be a backup of a person. And I think that until we all become robots, which may only be a few years away, we will need that human reassurance of a voice on the end of the phone helping you out. And I think that's really important.
I had an experience with a chatbot last week, which kept telling me I was not expecting that answer, and then asking me to try again and phrase it in another way until it understood what I was trying to say. By this stage, I was ready to throw the computer out the window. It was not a good experience.
Well,
Joe, did you want to comment on that point?
Yeah, just really to kind of tag on to what Steve's saying there, and I think the importance of kind of service shouldn't be underestimated. I think we often kind of talk about experience as being a kind of key driver of people's perception of value, and we've kind of got into this space now where we're talking about localization and personalization and activation as kind of key things that drive experience, which is absolutely true. But if you look at a lot of the research, it would still really point to those tangibles as being key drivers of experience, and the absolute priority of all of those drivers is service, and the quality of service that people receive. And that doesn't mean that people expect all the bells and whistles as far as service is concerned. Depending on what type of product it is they're staying on, they will have certain expectations, but it's absolutely about making sure those expectations are met. And even if it's a relatively kind of hands-off service provision, when somebody does need some human interaction or some support, it's making sure that they can access that and that it delivers based on whatever their needs are. So yeah, I think service delivery is still incredibly important regardless of the model. And again, Steve raises a very valid point. At the cost of people has increased significantly. So, as we all too often talk about, it's how you can make sure that you're employing people and really making sure they're focusing on the areas that can add value, and where you've got technology, making sure that they kind of work in harmony to make sure that the people you have are targeted around the things that really add true value to the experience of the customer.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Joe, I want to stay with you for a while and talk a bit about development, capital markets, interest around the sector, and perhaps how the uncertainty we're experiencing might play out in terms of what's happening in this sector. It's been really well documented that service departments really saw a huge surge in interest and investment as a result of the pandemic, because self-contained units made people feel safe. Do you think that when we're in kind of tumultuous times as we are at the moment, do you think that ethos kind of carries over and people do get that sense? And I guess the kind of logical conclusion to that is, will we continue to see renewed investment in this space, perhaps over traditional hotels because of that?
I mean, I would start by saying that I think the development dynamics in general, certainly following the pandemic, have become very, very difficult. If you look at where the capital values of real estate sit relative to replacement cost or the cost of development, there's a real dislocation there that means that developing anything from the ground up across the UK market, at least, and further afield is very, very challenging. I mean, if you look at the number of properties that are in construction within the service department space, for example, in the UK, I think it's about, off the top of my head, somewhere around 25 properties, and most of those are located, if not all of them, in London, Manchester, and Edinburgh, which are really the only markets in which the capital values are sufficient to justify development. And even in those places, it's marginal. I think one of the beauties of the service department space, and some of these more kind of flexible concepts, is that they work very well for adaptive reuse. So we know that in many markets there is a real challenge in sectors such as retail, where you've seen this big shift to e-commerce, which has meant that a lot of the high street is effectively redundant, and you've got public sector and private sector that sat on large strategic assets and struggling to really know what to do with them in terms of their ongoing use. And I think service departments can be a very compelling use, and again, because of its flexibility, where a traditional hotel concept, for example, might not work, you can more effectively use that space and drive the value more effectively by leveraging a service department concept or similar. So I think there is scope for continued development in the service department space, for continued development, should I say. I think what's also been quite interesting as well is that, if you look at many of the kind of concepts around service departments, they did great groundwork over recent years in terms of broadening their appeal beyond just corporate travel and more into leisure travel as well. And I think that has certainly underpinned, I would say, an opportunity to maybe be a little bit more bullish around cash flow, because you're not just reliant on one single segment of demand, but you can pull on different segments of demand through different months and days of the week, for example, which means that you can really drive the cash that's been generated by these businesses. And again, that makes the development all the more compelling than if you were just focused on more traditional corporate demand. So there are a number of tailwinds, certainly in terms of service departments when you're looking at it on a relative basis. But again, I would just kind of preface that by saying that development in general is very, very difficult out there right now.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Cara, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Joe said. And I mean, just to give some context and example, I mean, if you look at across the US alone and just look at the extended stay brand portfolio on the whole in hotels, there's been significant investment from all the major brands to not only invest and enhance the existing brands within that extended stay portfolio, but add new under that same umbrella. And everyone from Hilton to Marriott is doing it, right? So I think that is a true testament to what Joe is saying, and it's real live in action, as and we see that now kind of bleeding over into the international space, where some of those concepts are being brought across the pond, so to speak. The other thing that I think Joe hit on that's is important to note is that the cost of the build from the ground up is so much that asset repositioning is what we're seeing more of here than ever, right? I mean, you look at all the corporates that have left those corporate offices empty, and just interestingly enough, this week I got a phone call from somebody who was an investor of a fairly well-known hotel brand in Southern California, and wanted to reposition an asset from a standard hotel to a service apartment apart hotel, and wanted our help and consulting, and in return was going to talk to us about giving us access to inventory, right, from a consultancy and partnership perspective. So you also see the multifamily and property management operators in the US that are, looking at that entire asset and saying, how can we mitigate vacancy here and capitalize on rents by carving out a piece of it, taking out a hotel license and partnering with somebody who's an operator, to help them execute that with our level of expertise. So I think more and more, we'll see continued ground up construction, but we're going to see creative and strategic strategies like this pop into the market as our extended stay demands continue, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting development, the kind of multifamily build to rent developers getting involved. That's a US trend which is starting to happen over here. We've got companies like Greystar, for example, in their buildings now. There are 2 or 3 floors of units that are being leased on a short stay basis to leisure guests and corporate guests. Yeah, I think you're right, Cara. I think we'll see a lot more of that.
Yeah, and the other thing that the build to rent community solves for is that as the demographic of the traveler grows up, gets married, has families, they require more space, more bedrooms. Traditional service apartments stop at 1 to 2 bedrooms. So these build to rent schemes that are taking off in the States, quite frankly, they're entire communities of single family homes or townhomes that offer those 3 and 4 bedroom accommodations, right? And quite frankly, yeah, it's very interesting for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Cara. Let's talk a little bit about supply and demand. Steve, you mentioned that there's quite a bit of new inventory in London, which is partly responsible for the drop in rates. Are we kind of saturated in London now, or is there still room for growth? And are there other markets that you would consider looking at as a result?
Barbados. I'd like to get a 1-bedroom apartment with a barbecue on the beach.
Cricket tourism, is that for?
No, 100% occupancy, and I'll be the guest. Look, I think the world of work has changed, and I think London is a dynamic city, and the demand will come back. I think there's really good operators all over London doing slightly different things, fighting for a similar market, but in different locations. So I don't think it's oversaturated, because I don't think we've seen a calm world, if we ever do in the future, I don't know, like we saw in 2019 or even 2022 to an extent, where you had a whole year of like, this is how it's going to work. So I don't think you really know. I think it's just spiky, changing demand all the time. What I would say is that obviously there are markets, and this has happened in PBSA, where people build and build and build, and eventually there's too much stock of that type of accommodation. I think apart hotels are becoming more popular, and I think our building that we're launching in January is a conversion of a really, really ugly 60s, 70s office block that really didn't have a use as an office block. But the way that we're building it is that it will have the secondary value that Joe's mentioning, that it could be turned into residential. At the moment, a lot of operators are using residential to then use in service, and it's this whole hybrid world. If planning changed in the UK and made it more flexible, where you were so generous and you could have long stay and short stay, but also have ASTs in there, then I think there's definitely enough demand out there. I think where there's a restriction in London is the 90-day rule. I think now with the double service charge for some operators, council tax for some operators in residential buildings in certain councils, that's another challenge. And so I think it's really hard to tell. I think from a supply perspective, we would look elsewhere. But we still think from the student side, and even to an extent with the residents and Jataku, there are still pockets of London where I think we can still do well. I think there's some parts of London, sort of city fringe like Tower Hill and around that area. There's a lot of stock there now, all in a very short period, short space of area, and it all gone live in a short space of time. So you've got legacy stock, you've got our stock, which is probably in between, and you've got a lot of new stock, and so therefore that makes it a little bit more challenging. But yeah, I guess Cara probably know better about New York, but I think it's the same in New York, that certain areas like Brooklyn's booming, then other parts of Manhattan are not, and you know, it just depends. But flexibility from planning to allow flexibility of housing stock, I think, is needed in order for there not to be saturation. But I can't see that happening anytime soon in the UK. But maybe other places in the world will start trailblazing opportunities to show Western governments that you can have short stay corporate and long stay corporate and residential and co-living, and it all can be harmonious, basically to help drive revenue to a city and help utilize space.
Yeah, I agree. Multi-tenure development is where it's at, but the government's not quite on the same page yet. Hopefully soon. Joe, did you want to come in on that?
Well, it was just picking up on something that Steve was saying there, and I wonder whether Steve and Cara perhaps more appropriately have a view on whether there has been kind of a correlation between the demand for service departments in cities where there's been a stronger return to work and return to the office. Is that something that you see?
That'll be for you, Cara. You're
yeah,
global.
yeah.
Yeah, you go, Cara.
I was trying to get off mute. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a yes and a no, right? So, and just like, because Steve brought it up, I mean, take New York, for example. There is a strong return to work, but a lot of corporates have also, consolidated office space or gone to other parts of the city. So, for example, where central Manhattan was the place to be historically, that's not where always our corporate clients are and where that demand is. And when you get into a city like London or in New York, where there's only so much where you can go, right? It does make for a very difficult, challenging to find a solution that works, and is still cost effective and is still quality and in the right location, and it checks all those boxes. So yeah, from that perspective, I think when we're seeing this in other areas as well, there's demand shift, right? So maybe where we were seeing, which New York demand is up, but where we were seeing demand in some locations or some pockets, it's shifting to other places as well too, right? So there's kind of a, yes, there's a continue, and there's compression because there's not enough inventory in certain pockets of major metropolitan areas, to Steve's point, but then there's other demand that is shifted from one tier 2 city to a different tier 2 city, like we've seen the trajectories in the UAE in recent 12 to 18 months. So yeah.
Cara, on a related note, as Steve mentioned earlier, the way we work has changed. Are you seeing accommodation providers now incorporating workspace more in their building? So perhaps some co-working space, communal areas, or a dedicated area in the unit itself for people to work? Is that becoming more important?
Yeah, so there's definitely more of a demand to have a desk or a dedicated workspace from the customer side, from the consumer inquiry side. When we see those, that hasn't really changed, quite honestly, since COVID or pandemic. I think that's more of like a table stake or standard part of a request nowadays. I think what we are seeing is the people who are getting into development or repositioning of assets, and as they're bringing new assets on, they're not only ensuring that there are those communal workspaces, but they're actually doing a better job of highlighting things like that as an asset or an attribute to that asset, because that people wanted the gym, right? But now they want a place to work, and they need to get out of that 1-bedroom or studio apartment and kind of spread out a little bit for 8 hours every day, 5 days a week. So I think that it's just that we're also doing a better job of really, and I think Joe was the one that had this point earlier, but understanding, you know, consumer experience and how important that is to our positioning when we present an asset or present an option for consideration. It's definitely something that is much more highlighted and talked about for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Cara.
Yeah.
Joe, when you're looking at new hotel projects, are you seeing an increasing number of new properties which have an apartment element to them, so that the property can get the best of both worlds and you know, cash in on the business traveler as well as the leisure, and offer a broader range of accommodation types?
Absolutely. Interesting you mentioned that, George. I was meeting with an owner just a couple of days ago who has a project at the moment, should we say a core brand 4-star property in a Midlands town in the UK, who is currently exploring the opportunity to increase the number of keys on property, and that will be through the addition of extended stay rooms. And I think that comes with brands in part becoming a little bit more flexible and open. As we know, some of the traditional hotel brands in the past might have been perceived as a little bit kind of inflexible, but I think everybody is recognizing now the benefits of having different types of inventory. And again, it comes back to, you know, resilience is really driven by diversification, right? And the fact that if you have a well-diversified product that allows you to tap into different customer segments, then that is going to make for a much more resilient and stronger business, even through times of uncertainty. And, you know, when all segments are firing, then clearly it allows you to cash in at those points in time as well. So, yeah, most definitely. I think there's quite a lot of appetite and a lot of owners that are exploring doing some form of dual branding or broadening the configuration of room types that they have within what would have been very traditional hotel products to something that incorporates an extended stay component. Definitely.
Yeah, the dual branding trend, I think, is not going to go away. And, you know, the major hotel groups have got so many brands now. And if you add the word residences on the end of all those brands, you're doubling the number, which seems to be the way that we're going.
Absolutely. And, you know, we mentioned the development piece earlier on as well, and Steve's alluded to kind of the branded residences, but, you know, we all know that that's an area that's really taking off right now. And yes, there's challenges with bringing forward new developments, but we see those developments that are coming forward in the more traditional hotel space, they're often coming forward because they have a branded residential component, and the ability to be able to sell some of those off at a very early phase of the project and therefore finance the development. I mean, that is one of the ways that we are seeing developments come forward successfully.
Yeah. This is a UK specific question, Joe, but I think it's worth asking. In the kind of residential development sector, build to rent and so on, we've seen a lot of projects stall since the Building Safety Act, the second staircase, which applies to buildings over 18 meters. I think that is coming in for hotels and hospitality as well. Is that affecting development viability?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of a number of things, but yes, ultimately, you know, any changes to design is going to have an impact on development costs. It's going to have an impact on professional fees, and it's only going to add to what already is a real challenge in terms of project viability, as I alluded to earlier. So, you know, the very short answer to that is yes, it will have an impact, and it will be a positive one in terms of seeing new developments come forward.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Right, I've just seen the time. We've actually only got 4 minutes left. This hour has flown by. So I'd like to finish by asking you each in turn, given the background that we're looking at the moment, given the markets that we're looking at, what's the single most important piece of advice you'd offer to a service department operator looking to build greater resilience and adaptability into their business model with the kind of geopolitical uncertainty as the backdrop? Steve, I'll start with you.
I would do 2 budgets, do a best case and a worst case, and see if that property works. I would also say and it's any business, but particularly now, is never have all your eggs in one basket. And I think one needs to diversify there, make some maybe at the moment it is having some long-term rentals in there just to have your base business. But yeah, I think those two things I'd say.
Thank you, Steve. Cara, how about you?
Yeah, I would say for me, it would be partnership and protection. I think, you know, we have a very closely knit industry. And I think leaning on each other as partners and sharing intel and learning from each other, I think is critical. And taking those things and applying them to be more prepared for the future. The preparedness is key. I think from a protection, there's the physical protection, and then there's the digital. And I think, you know, we know that our industry has been under attack from a digital perspective for quite some time. So, you know, I think the preparedness around being protective and continuing to push our reputation on the whole as a safe place to stay is just extremely important.
Yeah, it's a good point. And also, you mentioned how this is still a really cooperative industry, and anyone who was in the room at the Service Department Awards recently will vouch for that. You know, the atmosphere is great, and people are happy to see, you know, their industry peers be successful. It's great to see. Long may it continue.
Competition.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Joe, last word to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Steve's mentioned the diversification piece, so I'll choose a different one. I think you know, whenever we go into a relatively choppy marketplace, I think ultimately from a consumer point of view, there is a flight to quality. And I think it's very easy when you're facing a landscape of, in some cases, softening demand and increasing costs, to really focus on cost reduction as a way to try and preserve the bottom line. But I do think there is an opportunity with very carefully deployed investment and CapEx to be able to stand out above the crowd at a time when there is a flight to quality, and as a result continue to either maintain your market share or even increase your market share, which you know, revenue solves a lot of problems. So I'll leave you on that one.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Joe. Thank you all. And we're going to show a few slides before we wrap up. And as I mentioned, we'll leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can take some notes from the chat. So this is the last in the current series of Service Department News webinars, but Eloise and I will be back in the autumn for series 12. Can you believe we've got to that number so quickly? You can see the topics for the next 3 webinars on the screen there, and the links to register for those are in the chat. If you'd like to work with us at Service Department News, or indeed any of our other brands at IHM, then please do get in touch. You can see my colleague Katie's details there on the screen and also in the chat. Thank you ever so much to the residents and to Muse for sponsoring this session. Thanks to Cara, to Joe, and to Steve for their great insights today. And thanks again, Steve, for stepping in at such short notice. Much appreciated. If you are on any of the social channels you can see on the slide there, then please do give us a follow. We're fairly active on those. Thanks to you all for watching, and I'll hopefully see you on another webinar in the autumn. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.